Good day, so this video is all about my answer regarding the question in Chapter 2, Experimental Units in Aquaculture Research Design. The question number 1 is, what is experimental units? The experimental units is all about the experimental studies. And syempre, ito ay tumutukoy sa tao, hayop, or object na subject ng experiments. So, experimental units is a physical entity that is a primary units of interest in a specific research, or ito yung layunin ng pananaliksik. And it is the entity of researcher want to make inference about in the populations based on the sample in the experiments. Experimental units in aquaculture is very important dahil mayroon itong ilang kadahilanan such as cost-involved purposes or object, availability of facility, applicability, management, climatic condition, and experimental periods have to be considered, so our researcher should be very clear about what experimental unit is to be used. Individual fish within the same aquarium, tank, cage, hapa, or pond can be experimental units or replicates if all the fish are tagged. The question number 2 is, what do you mean by experimental subunits? So, based on my research, the experimental subunit means the smallest division of experimental material such that any two units may receive different treatment in the actual experiments. An experimental unit may be divided into experimental subunits. For example, a sample of homogeneous material may be divided into subsample. Maaari itong hatiin sa dalawa. Then, the variation of subsample from within a sample is less than the variation between different sample. So, magkakaiba yung mga subsample na yon mula dun sa loob ng isang sample. The question number 3 is, under which condition can tank be used as experimental units? And under which condition can individual fish of the tank be used? So, based on my understandings, the condition can tank be used as experimental units is called treatments because it is a specific experimental conditions applied to the unit or the specific condition applied to the individuals as an experimental units. And it can be multiple treatment in one experiment. If an experiment has several explanatory variables, a treatment is combination or experimental condition applied to an experimental unit. The experimental unit is the tank, at the treatment is applied to the tank, not to the fish. Individual fish within the same aquarium, tank, cage, hapa, or pond can be experimental units or replicates if all the fish are tagged.
Practical exercise. Example 1. If a researcher is planning to conduct an experiment to determine the effect of 4 different types of hormones in spawning, what should be the experimental unit and which experimental system should be used? How many of the experimental unit and the system would you suggest using? My answer is, I think if a researcher is planning to conduct an experiment to determine the effect of 4 different types of hormones in spawning, the experimental unit and experimental system should be used for experiment the tank or aquarium because it is suitable and they are easy to manage. And also, it is one of the individual fish that can be experimental unit or replicates if all the fish are tagged. Conducting a breeding trial with hormones injection to determine the hormones efficacy in producing eggs is an example. In such case, either number or volume of eggs is counted or measured per female or per spawning, which can be converted into relative fecundity or per kilogram of female. Example 2. You are planning to conduct an experiment in earthen funds to compare 2 strains of tilapia for breeding performance. How could you use these funds for your trial? Estimate the number of each strains of fish needed based on different plants. My answer is, if I am planning to conduct an experiment in earthen funds to compare 2 strains of tilapia for breeding performance, I could use the procedure for breeding in tilapia by conducted in funds, tank, or hapas. The stocking ratio for females to males is 1:4:1 with 2 or 3:1 being the most common. The broad fish stocking rate is variable, ranging from 0 to 3 to 0.7 kg M2 in small tank to 0.2 to 0.3 kg M2 infants.